So we have two amazing industry leaders who are going to be joining us now. They're both driving sustainable innovations in the real estate and the infrastructure sectors. My first guest for this panel is Edoardo Geraci. He's the managing director and a partner at BCG, and he's bringing with him over a decade of experience in transforming mega projects, also crafting decarbonization strategies across the Middle East, including a groundbreaking ESG framework and thoughts around ESG frameworks for multi-billion-dollar development. Sound good already? I love the fact as well that Edoardo is also truly living his values. He is a man who walks the talk because he's currently renovating one of the greenest homes in Italy. That's pretty cool. Maybe we'll get him to tell us a little bit more about that as well. And then alongside him, we have Peter Jameson. He's a global topic lead for sustainability and climate at BCG, also a managing director and partner there. And his areas of expertise are also very wide-ranging, from decarbonizing the global shipping industry, also huge experience in real estate, as well as pioneering green innovations. They're both co-authors of a very key white paper that's going to be presented here at this forum. I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of our session. But together they are here this evening to help us demystify that topic of sustainability and show how all of us leaders can really turn these big ambitions that we have into actionable realities. So if you're ready for a session that's set to inspire and challenge and inform us, let's give them a hugely warm welcome as we explore beyond carbon, paths to sustainable transformation in Middle Eastern real estate. Can I have the most rousing end of day RFF 25 round of applause, please? Peter, Edo, come and join me on stage. It's a long walk to the chairs. Edoardo, Peter, come sit. These two maybe we'll sit and have a little cozy huddle up here. Fantastic. Amazing. So, they are waiting with bated breath, I can assure you, to hear about this whole big topic of sustainability. Because it is a big topic. It's a big word. It covers a huge number of things, I think you'll all agree in the audience. But to start us off, Peter, Edo, why don't you both just give me and our audience here a sense of what you mean when you say sustainability? Because what we want to do is really try and demystify that idea. It's a huge topic. So in real estate, what does this idea of sustainability mean to you? I'm going to come to you first, Peter.
Yeah, a really good question. What are we actually talking about?
Yeah.
Sustainability, for me, and I think for the way that the region is starting to talk about this, is it's about creating a sustainable future, a prosperous future. So this is not just about saving the whales or reducing the amount of carbon. This is a holistic way that we look at it. And very often the word that is used and the way that we look at sustainability is through the lenses of environmental, social, and governance. The environmental side, again, it's not just about carbon, it's about what are we doing to the ecosystem around us? Are we taking and protecting the wadis or the local environment we live in? From a social perspective, these are things like how do we actually engage and interact with the communities that sit around us? And then from a governance perspective, this is really about transparency. How do we create that kind of trust in what is going on in the kingdom from those people either in it or those people that are investing in it? So it's really that holistic view that, at least for me, sustainability means.
Absolutely, very holistic indeed, and I love the fact that you've already kicked us off talking about those ESG frameworks. And Edoardo, that's a key area of inspiration and insight and expertise for you as well. But just to start us off before we dig into ESG specifically, sustainability, do you agree with Peter here? Is it about changing that lens? Is it about taking this sort of slightly more holistic view, or is it just about saving the whales?
No, I fully agree.
Oh, I don't think we've got his microphone. Do we have Edo's mic?
I can also use this.
Oh, technology at its best. It might be off at your jacket. No. Can we have a sound guy jump on stage and help us out?
I can also shout.
Oh, there we go. Go into that one. Perfect.
Yeah, I can use this one. So I fully agree with Peter. And I will add actually that the sustainability journey eventually is just like any other journey within an organization. It is composed by several factors that you need to just increase and add to your decision-making process to make decision for the good side of the company, for the long-term value of the company. So eventually, it is true that it's something new, but it just like enrich all the other dimension of sustainability. I think one thing that is very different in terms of sustainability for real estate, it is that 80% of its impact is done in the design phase, so at the beginning of the journey. So the decision that you have at the beginning of the journey will have the highest impact throughout all the lifetime of the company, both from an environmental perspective, so from the CO2 perspective, for example, but also from the social and economic perspective.
So we have sustainability as a journey, we have sustainability as a holistic view. Does that marry up with what you're seeing in your lives and work in the real estate industry? Just have a think about that. How are you defining this concept of sustainability? What does that really mean? And now I would like to take the discussion towards this idea of ESG. And if we start to view sustainability through a more of an ESG lens, what that's going to really mean in terms of priorities and maybe a mindset change even for the leaders, developers, investors in this room today and the wider region. So Eduardo, I know again, this is something that you preach a lot about, which is, ESG. What does that really mean? I know it's an acronym that we use a lot, but what does it mean in real terms around priorities for leaders?
So what does it mean? Basically, it's to have an holistic perspective of sustainability. So many times companies focus only on one aspect, and many times this aspect is the carbon sustainability for obvious reasons and for good reasons. However, having an ESG approach means having an holistic vision, multi-phased vision that includes several variables. Now, it is also true that many organizations cannot address all the challenges of the world all at the same time. And this is why, together with Peter, we usually run a materiality assessment, a double materiality assessment, prioritizing what is relevant for the organization and relevant for the society, prioritizing them and tackling them at the beginning. So having an holistic point of view, however, starting from something very concrete and precise and what matters for you.
Yeah, I'd love to. You should jump in there, Peter. Please do, yeah.
So I think Edo's made a really good point that I want to build upon, and that is that, this needs to be holistic, but it can't just sit on its own. And actually, when we talk about environmental, social, etc., sustainability, we need to couple that with economic sustainability. So when you're making decisions in your organization, it's not just about saving the whales or looking at carbon. It's also about how economically does this impact the development. Yeah. And in most cases, what we find is when you start focusing on these material topics, they also have a positive ROI or positive economics on the organization. And for me, that is the beauty of this topic, is when you put these two things together, you often find these sweet spots.
Absolutely, and it's interesting you talk about ROI, so the return on investment in tangible physical economic terms. But I think when we were talking previously, you've also brought up this idea about reputation. And I think it's about maybe considering that as part of the ROI, perhaps, that it's not just about doing the right thing for the right thing's sake. It's about doing the right thing for all of these reasons, but which might also have some tangential benefit, be that economic or reputational. Is that something you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, maybe I take my first view. So this topic has really gone in cycles around the globe, from being a buzzword that everybody was jumping on, to a period of where there's been a little bit more skepticism around this. And this has led many organizations to be very careful about what they communicate. This phrase, greenwashing, has hit many companies because they've gone out and preached one thing, and then when you look underneath the hood, there's something very different going on. And then we're in a particularly interesting phase this year with so many political changes going on in the world. That being said, all that I can see happening is that the momentum does not stop. Just because one country's political view at the moment is to that's rubbish, let's put this to the side. That is not what we're seeing. We are seeing a continued momentum around this. It's not going away.
Yeah. And obviously, Edo, going back to the introduction, this is something you care about personally, passionately as well. You're not renovating your house in Italy for the sake of reputational ROI. So why do people do these things? What is it that really makes a difference? What is it that gets people to care outside of we've got to fulfill certain criteria, we've got to tick certain boxes, we've got to meet certain targets. Yes, it might make us some more money, but what is it really that drives this behavioral change, would you say, in companies?
Yeah, I think there are several reasons and that resonate for several type of people. I would say that the reason for the actually wide adoption of sustainability, I have to say, it's the money. So the fact that your house, for example, over the next 50 years will consume, for example, less electricity or will be completely net zero, this will have a very concrete impact on your wallet, for example. Another example is de-risking. So in some of the mega projects here in the Kingdom, they're building a lot of offices, residential units, in apartments. So is it right now the right time to do a LEED Gold, a LEED Platinum building, for example, that will consume much less, and maybe in 10 years you will have a better yield on the sales value? So eventually you will hedge the risk of having something obsolete in 5-10 years from now. Yeah. Then, of course, what you probably were alluding to is that it's not only that. There are many people that actually care, and we run and we launch a study with Peter on the willingness to pay, also in Saudi Arabia, of people for houses that are sustainable, both from the material side, so the building material, and for the operation side. And the results were really surprising. So many people, especially of a certain niche of the population, are willing to spend up to 20% more for something that is sustainable. Yeah. So this goes way beyond the break-even of the gain. So there is also the drive of the people to do the right thing. What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, so I think we're almost like the yin and the yang here. I'm very much about speaking to the heart. And I do believe that we have now a generational shift coming through into the workforce and into making big decisions that have grown up with this topic as children. My 8-year-old daughter, when I decide to take the car instead of walk to the shop just around the corner, she's the first one that taps me on the shoulder. And I think that's the kind of thinking that will change from, the old grey-haired people like myself to those that are growing up now.
Yeah, I agree. We're having a conversation over lunch about exactly that, how it's the younger generation, our children, who are saying, turn off your car at the red light, or why are you even taking the car, or hang on a minute, this has got too much plastic, or they're so much more conscious of it than I think any of us were in our teenage years, that it is something that we can't just pay lip service to. But I don't think anyone in this room would say that you don't have an ambition to do things in a sustainable way. Would anyone be brave enough to put their hands up and say, yep, I don't want to be sustainable? Of course not. We're not going to hear that because it's so embedded now. But there's a big difference, isn't there, between big ambition and action, and how to actually take the next right step and the next practical step. So before we come on to talk a bit more about sort of that societal aspect around ECG, which is where I want to go, Peter, just, with this in mind around this big ambition, the topic that is not going to go away, having defined it, what can leaders be doing? What are the practical, actionable next steps that we should be considering?
Yeah. Wow, that's a big question.
Well, it's only a little question, really.
So let me boil it down. So for me, there's 6, but I'll go through them very quickly. Number 1, don't try and do everything. Yeah. Focus your efforts. Don't try and spread yourself thin on 50+ different topics, initiatives. The second one is, this shouldn't just be a topic that sits in one corner of an organization. This is something that should be lived and breathed in every part of the organization. That's tough how you get there, and we'll come back to that later.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that.
The third one is, be very clear about what you're trying to achieve. We're talking in parables here and in big words, but be very concrete about it. Yeah. What are the KPIs? What are the ways that we're going to measure it? The fourth thing, and this is, as a football fanatic, this is really important for me, is it's not an individual sport, an individual organizational sport. You need to engage your ecosystem. So who are the partners, who are the suppliers, who are the government bodies that you're going to be working with on this topic? The fifth one, and I'm sure we'll hear this many times, and I can even see with the graphics around this room, use technology to your advantage. There are so many technologies out there that make decision-making far easier, reporting far easier, and so on. So really leverage technology. And then the final thing, and I think, for the CEOs out there, this is about being bold and showing true leadership around this. Because when you have that North Star, we know where we're going to go, we know what we're going to measure, you need then somebody to stand up and to champion this. And it needs to come from the top.
Yeah. Wow, very inspiring, very challenging words. And let's go into this in a bit more tangible detail, because I think we could talk about some of these metrics and some of these next steps ad infinitum, and we could have a fabulous discussion. But let's really get into some of the nitty-gritty that might help to change our minds on where we should be focusing and prioritizing. So, Eduardo, you have huge experience, don't you, in the mega projects and the big giga projects. And these principles that Peter's just outlined, I'm sure you're seeing have an element of success. But what I'd love to do is just understand, when we're talking about particularly your sort of innovations to do with ESG frameworks, how we start bringing more of the S into our conversations. Because lots of this stuff is cultural. Lots of this stuff is societal. It's about engaging hearts and minds. So how do we really start to think about that social aspect of ESG as much as the decarbonization, as much as the governance? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, no, this is a great question, especially because it's extremely relevant for Saudi Arabia, and in the current environment where we are, where there are these huge mega and giga projects all around the kingdom, which touch upon actually a very rich texture of tribes and communities around the kingdom. So it is extremely critical for the kingdom and for this mega project to not only consider these communities, but actually leverage them for their success. We have done actually a few community strategies across the kingdom, and what we have found is that the mega projects and the organization that they manage to leverage this community, for example, as part of their workforce for certain tasks, for events around the mega projects, are the mega projects that actually have the biggest advantage. They have a real leverage and edge against the others. So they really leverage the community to extrapolate some values out of it. I don't know if you want to say the examples.
A really concrete example here, one of the mega projects had a couple of challenges around attracting the right workforce, and they had a challenge around communication. They decided, okay, we're going to focus on community engagement. One of the concrete initiatives there was to open up access for jobs within that mega project. Within 24 hours of a job posting going online, 5,000 applications from the local community were received for these jobs in here. And before that, the engagement with the community was virtually nothing. So just very, very simple initiatives like this can really start to raise the topic and give back to both, to the mega project, but importantly, give back to the community as well.
I love that, because a big topic of this whole conference is about humanity. It's about the people aspect of things. And some of the problems I think we have when it comes to development and new projects around real estate is getting people on board. It's a people issue first and foremost so often, whether that's a cultural people issue, whether it's a jobs people issue, whether it's a workforce people issue, whether it's any of those things. Ultimately, it does come down to the benefit to community, aligning these big sustainability goals with local ambition, don't you think?
So I do, but look, there is a flip side to this.
Oh, tell us that.
And this is the risk side of it. So if you go out and you say, yes, okay, we're going to engage in the community, and you put these initiatives in place, it only takes one mistake, one thing you do wrong that impacts the whole community, and that credibility and that trust that you've created has been lost. So, for example, if you suddenly, decide that you're going to tear up the road next to this community, which increases their travel time to work each day, you're going to have a very angry community. If that hasn't been communicated to them, if you haven't engaged them with this, then suddenly that credibility and trust, which is so important between communities and these developments, is lost. And
Go, yeah.
And Joe, I just would like to compliment. Wow, wake up.
It's a big wake-up call.
I just would like to complement this point because the way to avoid this, to mitigate what Peter has said, is to apply a very comprehensive structure framework. And we usually ask 3 questions to ourselves. First of all is, who are these communities and what are their needs? So you really need to understand the needs of this specific community in particular. For example, there was a community, I remember, near this mega project that they had a park with a football pitch that was not refurbished and the kids couldn't play. We refurbished the pitch and the community was extremely happy. So this is number 1. Second is to tailor the initiatives to the community, extremely precisely and extremely specific. And the third one is a governance model. So have a governance, so a central body within the organization, which cannot be, for example, a super micro function within marketing or something else. It needs to be a body that oversees the full community space, that together with the community think through the initiatives and how to put these things into practice.
Yeah, I think this idea of community centricity in our focus, in our approach, is something that we're going to hear a lot about over the next few days as well, and it's something I think we can all take very much to heart when we're exploring this idea of the human element. But just to conclude this part of our conversation, Peter, you've talked about this risk of getting something wrong. Do you think that risk breeds inaction? And how do we mitigate this fear of doing the wrong thing, which means we might do nothing?
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge around inaction at the moment sits on the complexity of this. And it goes back to one of my first points. It's around focus, making sure that you're not trying to do everything, because trying to do everything, that becomes too much for an organization. The risk element and the risk of doing the wrong thing, I actually don't see that in the kingdom, actually. I see actually very forward-looking, very bold ambitions followed up by bold actions. I think my call is, be careful, look at those risks and manage those risks in the right way.
Yeah, and to Edo's point, it's really about if we understand what the community needs, wants, is going to benefit from, it then becomes quite hard to get it wrong, doesn't it, if that's our focus and that's our heart from the outset. So let's talk about this requirement for adaptation, because we've understood what the topic is. We understand that it's got some different key elements of focus, that we can view it through a different lens, but it needs more than just mitigation. I mean, climate risk is absolutely real. Climate change is real. We just have to look at the floods recently in Valencia in Spain or the wildfires in California to know that things are changing on this planet Earth that we call our home. So how do we really start to understand that necessity for adaptation as a critical response rather than just continuing to mitigate against a future that might never arrive? So, Edo, I mean, climate change is already impacting the communities. We see it, as we've said, and we've talked about decarbonization, but our discussion can't end there. What does adaptation truly look like, and especially from your work, say, with the mega projects in Saudi and the broader Middle East? What are people doing to really adopt and adapt?
Yeah, so I think this is extremely important because unfortunately, the climate change is sure, and it's happening under our eyes. In 2021, more than 430 climate disaster has happened, and this is much worse than the average of the previous 20 years. I mean, we have examples in Europe, North America, Australia, Southeast Asia, everywhere in the world. Everybody has experienced some of them. In Saudi Arabia as well, we have run an assessment of the risk, and there are huge risks for Saudi going forward in terms of increase of temperature, water scarcity, hails, and extreme events in general. So, as you mentioned correctly, adaptation is critical. Now, when we talk about adaptation in BCG, we always talk about adaptation and resilience.
Yeah.
So there are two aspects of the same coin. Adaptation is about adapting to the climate change and trying to get the best out of it, and sometimes also get an opportunity. So try to minimize the damage and sometimes getting opportunities. Resistance is about increasing the resilience of the infrastructure, if for infrastructure, but in general of the society. Having a prompt response sort of system, having buildings that they can resist. Now, these two things, they seem extremely, let's say, technical sometimes, but if you want to have a proper planning of it and to have them under control, you need to really think about this in a broader perspective, also from an economic perspective, with the business case and understanding where you need to do what and how you need to embed the adaptation and the resilience within your organization.
Okay. Do you think we're going fast enough?
No. If you want like a very quick answer, I think no, we are not absolutely fast enough, especially in some regions where the perception of adaptation and resilience is not needed. For example, in this region, since the conditions are very harsh already, or you can say that are harsh, many people think there is the conception that it's not going to be a problem for the next 30, 50 years.
Yeah.
We saw Dubai last year, and this was a huge disaster for Dubai.
Yes.
Multi-dozen billions of dollars spent, house floods, cars destroyed, and also some people lost their life. So I think overall, to answer your question, no, we should accelerate, and we have a unique opportunity because we are building cities, districts, that they need to be future-proof. So we have a unique opportunity to implement all these principles within our cities.
So Peter, help us with some strategies. I mean, you've worked with global players, you've worked across multiple industries. Are there some lessons around adaptation and the strategies to really get that in place that we can transfer?
So first, I want to get something off my chest.
Oh, go on
this,
then.
This is the frustration that Edo was starting to allude to, is that this topic, the topic of climate change, it doesn't really impact you until it impacts you.
Yes.
If your house is in the hills of California, or if your flat is in the destructive ways in Spain. And the key reason for this is, at least for me, is that when we talk about this topic, when the media inflates what's happening, the facts around the risks are not clear enough.
Yeah.
And that comes back to my point of answering you, is that this topic can be talked about, on the front pages of the press, but until you've understood what is the impact for me, my development, the community around me, can I then start to take this seriously?
Yeah.
How often is it likely to be that I'm going to have a plus 60-degree temperature here? What is the likelihood? How many years will it take me to have a water source? So I need to start calculating the risk potential of each of these facts.
So is that kind of scenario planning? Is that what you're talking about?
It's exactly scenario planning. With my area that I'm going to be impacted on, what are the chances of these happening?
Yeah.
And then you can start saying, okay, how do I mitigate against this? And how do I adapt with it?
Yeah.
Sometimes the adaptation could be very simple, like planting trees down a boulevard to help with reducing the heat, as an example.
Which has been done very successfully here as an example, hasn't it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I do think that when you start then looking at these risks, it's almost like the way that the insurance industry looks at this, is what is the risk? What will it cost me to actually make sure I won't do that? And what is the trade-offs that I'm making there? And that's very often, when we're helping with these, it really starts with, what are the facts? What is the real impact? Not what the news is saying, what's happening to me here now on my development, and then building the scenarios out of that.
Yeah. I mean, you've both talked about the fact that this is in part a leadership issue and it needs to start from the top. But people at this conference, some of the people in the room or the wider area and the exhibition area, won't necessarily feel like they have the decision-making responsibility or the right to create these strategies. What would you say to them in terms of supporting their organization's cultural approach and response to embedding these changes when they maybe don't feel like it sits within their direct responsibility? Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, look, we have seen and we see this day to day in the companies, and we saw several examples of initiatives being implemented starting really from the bottom. Really, start from very small step. I tell you an example. We went to a company, I remember they had all these 0.25 bottle of plastics. It's a disaster. I mean, there are 500 people. Imagine how much plastic you drink. You drink 2 liters, 3 liters water per day, 500 people. It's trucks and trucks of plastic. And there was a very small young person at the client side and said, but why don't we just get the water bottle as a welcome gift and like the barrel of water, right? The gallons. As simple as that. Mm-hmm. She went to the CEO with our support. We did a small document, like as good consultants with the business case. And the CEO, the day after, she decided to change the full procurement of water. Now, this is a very stupid and small example, I understand. But
I don't think any example's stupid because they make a difference.
No,
so.
But imagine how many trucks of plastic she saved.
Yeah.
And she was the most junior in the room by far. And she was listened to. So at the same time, if you want to speak about something bigger, right? But if like a junior person working in the design department of a mega project has an idea of using green carbon, green concrete, or a greener type of concrete, or to do like a sort of a certification, people listen. Also, the most senior people listen. If you have a business case, if you have something positive to propose, people listen. So my suggestion is, don't be afraid to speak up and show your willingness to change. You will be surprised how many people listen and then they execute the idea that you thought it was impossible to execute.
Yeah, that's a great endorsement and a bit of a call for bravery. But, you know, turning these big ambitions into tangible action for success, we all sort of know the theory. We all are kind of sitting here going, yep, we need to make the small changes and reduce it. Why aren't we already doing it? Peter, what is it that's stopping us? What are these barriers and how can we overcome them?
Yeah, so look, for me, you can attach the word bravery to it, or you can attach the word responsibility.
I like that.
And I actually think that every one of us has a responsibility to ask a question at the right time. And if we don't get the right answer the first time, then we ask the question again a second time. I've seen so many examples, like Edo is alluding to, where people throughout different levels of the organization have spoken up and asked that question. Why isn't this happening more? I think this is around the culture that we need to create in the future. We need to create a culture where actually those people that are asking those questions are listened to a little bit more. And then that goes back to my point around it is important that leadership are at the front of this and actually owning this.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of people taking responsibility, everyone, not just the junior person or the CEO,
Absolutely.
but everybody, and then creating a culture where those questions, those ideas can actually be heard.
And of your 6 points, your 6 kind of key priorities, is the one thing where you believe if we started there, it would make a bigger difference?
Oh, tough question. Can I pick 2?
You can have 2.
Yeah.
Only because I'm feeling very generous.
So I come from an engineering background, and I have learnt throughout my business career that if you don't measure it, it never gets done.
Okay.
So measurements and targets, number 1. And then number 2, and I've said this so many times, this is about leadership. Leadership at every point of the organization. Supporting the North Star and supporting that vision. And I think in the kingdom, we have that North Star.
Yeah.
We have a 2060 strategy for the nation. We have a 2050 target from PI. This direction is clear. Now we just need to make sure that at every level of the organizations, we actually follow through on that.
And Edo, from your experience, are there some of these key principles that need to be implemented in practice that you've seen having real sort of routes to success when it comes to ensuring that these sustainability goals get met?
I think so. I think that there are some large mega projects. I mean, we talk about real estate, so let's talk about this. That they really are walking the talk. Right, so that they called us in, so they were aware that they needed support, because let's speak clearly, the sustainability is something that in the region came up very recently. So they were aware that they need support after the bold the bold vision of Net Zero 2060 from His Royal Highness. They needed support, they called us in, we went there and do the assessment with obviously many gaps, and they actually were very receptive to understand and to implement what we told them, and to include them within, for example, the stage gate process, for example, or to also invest sometimes in additional capex for long-term benefits, for example, for the building material, for some greener building materials. Or, for example, I remember an example of a client, he was so against certification. He was calling me Captain American, even though clearly I don't have an American accent. But, at the end of the journey, actually, he was the one pitching and preaching for the LEED Gold to all these real estate units. So this mega project, now it's going with LEED Gold for all its real estate units, and we're talking about more than 5 million square meters of real estate. So this is a huge impact if you think about the energy emission that we save. We're talking about millions of CO2 ton of reduction, and this is because they care, and if there is a business case, again, they do it.
Yeah. Absolutely, and we can all very much play our part. So I think to wrap up, I'm really feeling that the call to action here is that you know, the future of sustainable real estate is going to depend on people taking, well, having bold ideas and taking real tangible action regardless of role, seniority, belief in permissions, but finding a way to engage and embed that culture that says if we don't do it, the risk of inaction is far greater than the risk of the potential actions that we can take. Would that be a fair summary, Peter? Is there anything you'd like to add to that as an endorsing rallying cry as we finish?
So I'm sitting on the stage with the three of us, thinking how evangelical we're being, trying to preach our words to the audience. I think what's really critical is we start to use the language that other people are talking. And if I'm going to a guy in development or a girl in development who are talking about business cases, I don't come in talking about saving trees. I need to start from the place that they're standing. So whilst it's great to preach these things, I think we need to start learning a language that the ecosystem understands. And that's not always as extreme necessarily as the way that we talk about the topic.
So it requires some empathy and some research and meeting people where they're at, I think, doesn't it? Yeah. Edo, final words for everyone?
Yeah, I will just conclude that I think actually what you're saying, the risk of not doing anything right now, it's much bigger than the risk of taking the risk of doing something related to sustainability. I think His Royal Highness was clear, Net Zero 2060, the country needs to be there. If now you don't take action now, especially in the real estate, so in the design, pre-concept, concept phase, doing it later, and it will arrive because we have very clear target from Net Zero 2060, PIF Net Zero 2050, it will cost much more. So my suggestion is think about this and do a sustainability strategy, at least the baseline of it, and understand what are the actions to do something about it. The risk of not doing anything, it's too big.
Yeah, so embedded and integrated from the outset rather than running the risk of needing to retrofit or to put things in place afterwards. I think that's it's a very helpful thing. I believe that quite a lot of what you've talked about on stage today is going to be in this white paper. So as I mentioned in my introduction, both Peter and Edoardo are co-authors alongside a few other people of this brilliant white paper, which is all about sustainability reimagined. It's being published during this forum, and it should appear on the RFF website, so you can check it out there. And if you'd like to have a conversation with them as well, there are some copies of this, hard copies of this, at the BCG sort of stand, which is out in the food networking reception area. So please do go and grab a copy if you're interested in finding out more and connecting with these two industry leaders. So I'd love you to show your appreciation, please. I hope you found it as insightful and as interesting interesting and as challenging, and hopefully a little bit of provocation to maybe go out there and do something just a little bit differently. I love Peter's words. You don't have to do it all, and we have to start from something, but we have to embed it from the very, very first stages. So thank you. You've challenged me. You've challenged all of us. Can we give them a very, very warm appreciation with a big round of applause, please? Thank you.